after Tehran says it had reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial ships, which coordinate with Iran. This comes after a 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon took effect. Iran had asked for that as part of its truce with the U.S. The Revolutionary Guard says civilian ships transiting the strait will need the Navy's authorization to pass and will have to take a route designated by Iran. Military vessels will be strictly prohibited. Earlier, the foreign minister declared the strait completely open. That was welcomed by President Trump. He says the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports will remain in force as talks to end the war continue, and claims a final deal is mostly complete. However, an Iranian source has told Al Jazeera that negotiations are still at a very early stage, and the next step will be agreeing on a framework for negotiations, not a final agreement. Let's bring in Mike Hanna, who's in Washington for us at the White House. We just heard from President Trump a short while ago, very briefly, but he's made a number of announcements today on social media these last few hours, not just on the Strait of Hormuz, but also on Iran's nuclear program. What does this all signal, Mike, as far as the negotiations?
Well, it appears to show a degree of optimism on President Trump's part. It also appears and some Iranian sources to be somewhat delusional on certain points. But we heard President Trump there just repeating the fact that the U.S. will continue its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz until he says a deal is signed and completed. So President Trump insisting that that blockade will continue despite Iran saying that it will conditionally open the strait, something that President Trump also celebrated earlier on in the day. Now he's also talking about some kind of agreement of removing nuclear reactive material out of Iran. This is something that he has spoken about before, but he appears to think that part of the deal would be for Iran to hand over some of its radioactive nuclear stock, which it uses, Iran says, for peaceful nuclear development. So President Trump making a series of statements on social media, all of which are tied around an apparent belief that a deal is very near. He says all the agreements are in place. It's just basically dotting the I's and crossing the T's, he does imply. So that is what he's been saying throughout the day, that the deal is close. It could be imminent. It could be over this weekend. So a lot of messaging from President Trump, perhaps indicating where he wants it to go rather than where it actually is going.
Mike, we have a clip of what President Trump said just a short while ago when he landed in Las Vegas about Iran and that agreement. Let's listen to that, and I'll come back to you afterwards.
We're having a big day. We'll see how it all turns out, but it should be good. We've had some very good discussions, and hopefully that subject that you like to talk about will be very good. And we've done a good job, but we'll see. Talks are going on. It'll go on over the weekend, and a lot of good things are happening. And that includes Lebanon, too.
There's been reporting today that there's still, Iran says there's significant differences.
Well, there could be. Let's see what happens. If there are, we'll have to straighten it out, but I don't think there's too many significant differences.
On the blockade, Mr. President,
yeah.
what will it take to end the blockade?
When the agreement is signed, the blockade ends. As soon as the agreement gets signed, that's when the blockade ends.
Did Anthropic have a meeting at the White House?
Who?
Sir, Anthropic?
I have no idea.
On Cuba, Mr. President.
So, Mike, President Trump they're saying that talks will go over the weekend, will go on over the weekend. Do we have any indication who will be part of those talks?
No indication whatsoever. In fact, these talks that President Trump continues to talk about do not appear to have been formalized in any way. But one interesting point in the course of the day, in one of his social media messages, President Trump said that he has not settled on who will lead the delegation should these talks be resuscitated or renewed. Now, the last set of talks in Pakistan were headed by Vice President J.D. Vance. Now, President Trump now indicating that he may change the point person for any negotiation that may happen. This is a very interesting tactic by President Trump, maybe trying to keep other negotiators or those who will be negotiated with on edge. But President Trump, once again, you hear him there saying everything is good. He said as well that there are no significant differences with Iran. Now, that is an important point, given the reporting that we have had from Tehran about there being very significant differences in terms of what is expected or what the President Trump is expecting from Iran. So it's still a situation of mixed messaging. President Trump welcoming that the Strait of Hormuz is open, but insisting that the blockade, the U.S. blockade of the Strait, will continue until a deal is signed, something that President Trump says negotiations could happen this weekend, as soon as this weekend, without any real evidence that any such preparations are being made.
Mike Hanna at the White House in Washington, thank you very much for bringing us the latest there. Let's now get the view from Tehran and speak to Abbas Aslani, a senior research fellow at the Tehran-based Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thank you so much, Abbas Aslani, for joining us. President Trump said just a few minutes ago that he doesn't think there are too many significant differences between Iran and the U.S. right now. Is that how it's being seen in Tehran?
Fully, we are witnessing not just a gap in the discussions and negotiations, but also the narrative which we are hearing. So there are competing, let's say, accounts on what is taking place at the negotiations. The U.S. president's optimistic outlook of the process contrasts with the view here in Tehran, and he considers the war has been completed. It's a done deal, and all things have been discussed and agreed. And he's talking of an imminent, potential round. But the Iranian side has a different, let's say, interpretation of what is taking place, saying that they have been only able to address the cessation of the hostilities, and issues like the nuclear issue as well as the others remain to be addressed. And they are not confirming also any second round for the negotiations. And it seems that, interestingly, we are seeing that they are in two different worlds.
Right.
And
but you say that, Abbas Aslani, but Donald Trump has been given quite a few details, especially when it comes to the nuclear issue. He says Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely. He says Iran has agreed to the U.S. recovering 60% of its enriched uranium. I mean, he's providing quite a lot of details. Is this just narrative, or has there actually been some agreements perhaps going on behind the scene on the nuclear issue?
Fully, the nuclear issue remains to be among the sticking points and an elephant in the room, even among the American officials, or the account that we are hearing from the American media is not consistent. They are talking of suspension for a limited time, like the 20 years, or some are saying forever, like the U.S. president. But Iran is saying that, this has not been, resolved. Iran says that the right to enrichment cannot be, negotiated, and they are not going to export the high enriched uranium stockpile.
What's the red line?
So this at least indicates that.
What is the red line, Abbas Aslani, on the nuclear issue? Is it enrichment, or is it stopping the nuclear program indefinitely? What is it? Is the time frame the issue?
Iran insists that it will not accept zero enrichment. Whether it's going to be suspension or not, that's not yet clear. But at least Iran is insisting that it has the right to enrich uranium under the international law. And also it says that it will not export the highly enriched uranium stockpile, and they can be downblended, or let's say downgraded to a lower level. And also that is important that other issues have not yet been resolved, like the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran believes that a new protocol needs to be adopted in that area.
Well, let me ask you about the Strait of Hormuz, because we've heard the IRGC say that civilian ships transiting through the strait will need the Navy's authorization. Earlier, the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said shipping was allowed, but only along routes designated by Tehran. So what's changed here? I mean, how should we understand this current situation? How is it different from what we've seen in the past 7 weeks?
At least what we know up to now is that the passage of the vessels through the waterway has been allowed to a certain number of tankers, through the designated route by Iran, only commercial vessels, and only through coordination with the Iranian side. But this is based on the April 8th, ceasefire agreement, which this can somehow, subject to further changes, more vessels transiting through the waterway. But this somehow needs to be based from Iranian perspective on the new protocol, meaning that it should be coordinated with Iran, controlled with Iran. But also there have been some discussions when they are saying new protocols, charging, tolls also comes into our mind.
Interesting. So
And
this new protocol, just to clarify,
again,
Abbas Aslani, this new protocol that you described will put in place a toll system?
It is also among the, let's say, regulations that will be included in the protocol. That is the designated routes by Iran, coordination with Iran, and maybe charging tolls. We have not been provided the exact details of what that entails, but the officials also have been hearing to the tolls now and then, and we are hearing again different narrative from the American side on this, but at least they are working on that. And to what extent the progress has been made, that remains a question, but at least that is among the sticking points at the negotiating table, Foley.
Abbas Aslani, thank you so much for bringing us the view there from Tehran. Abbas Aslani is a senior research fellow at the Tehran-based Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thank you for your time. Well, let's show you what the Strait of Hormuz looks like right now after those announcements earlier by Iran. This is a live map of maritime traffic data. The red dots and arrows you can see are oil tankers. Those in green are other commercial vessels. Around a fifth of global oil supplies are normally transported through the waterway, though it's been largely closed since the start of the war 7 weeks ago. Iran says ships must use the country's new routes to pass the strait. Last week, the Revolutionary Guard said this was a route vessels needed to take in coordination with its navy. This is a more northerly route, closer to Iran's coast. Those shipping routes pass either side of Larak Island. That heavily guarded island is reportedly being used by the IRGC to monitor ship traffic. Let's speak to Scott Eulinger about this. He's a retired CIA station chief and a former U.S. Navy officer, and is joining us from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being with us again on Al Jazeera. With this announcement by the IRGC Navy that ships have to coordinate with it to go through, has anything changed effectively at the Strait of Hormuz? If you were a commander of a vessel today, would you feel that you were crossing it in a safe and free way?
Right. Well, actually, right. This announcement by the IRGC, I think, is absolute propaganda and is not to be trusted. The Iranian Navy or the IRGC Navy is in no position to dictate terms. Now, they have stated that they have changed the traffic separation scheme, and the excuse is that it's to avoid potential mine areas. I'm not sure if the United States has weighed in on this, but this doesn't smell right to me as somebody who's personally made that transit several times. Remember, a lot of the Iranian announcements are made for propaganda purposes, lies to their own people. They don't reflect the official views of the Iranian government. It's just that that is the vision of Iran they want their people to see. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Right, a grain of salt. But if you're a captain you're a commander of a ship that wants to pass through the strait today, would you feel confident, even if you say this is just propaganda by the Iranians?
Right. That's a good question. And the answer is exactly. It is going to affect you. The captain of a tanker is going to await company orders. And basically, these kinds of announcements are going to make a private commercial company operating for profit a little nervous. And so that's going to make them less reluctant to go through the straits. And that's why I was saying earlier, I think that we'll start seeing normal traffic resume after several more days, because clearly there is some negotiating or statement that the U.S. needs to make to clarify some points regarding the Straits of Hormuz, because it is a confusing situation for a ship owner and a ship's captain.
Right. I was going to ask you about that. What do you think they would like to hear right now, whether from the U.S. or Iranians? How long do you anticipate for traffic to resume there? How long can countries in this region, like Qatar, for example, start to move their products, their oil and gas again freely through the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, like I said, it's highly unlikely that the Iranians are going to attack, but still the companies are cautious. So I think that probably in short order, CENTCOM, the U.S. government will clarify this situation, whether is traffic indeed to follow a northern route, as you stated, or is that simply propaganda? So the United States is probably going to come out and try to clarify this, because only when we have a clear situation are there going to be enough tankers confident enough to make the passage.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there's a huge backlog of vessels waiting to make it through.
Right.
Once it starts moving again, who goes through first? How do they decide that?
That's a very good question. There really isn't a very strong vessel traffic service going through the straits. There may be some attempt to organize it by how long each vessel has been waiting. How long has a vessel been at anchorage? And perhaps the ones that have been at anchorage longest would be the ones who would be allowed to transport first. But I have a feeling it'll tend to be a little bit disorganized, more on a first come, first served basis.
Yeah, and the thing is that we're also hearing from the U.S. that they're continuing their blockade of the strait. And the Iranians have previously said that if the U.S. kept this naval blockade in place, that they could escalate, possibly closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, another crucial waterway in this region. Why is the U.S. doing this, keeping this pressure on the Strait of Hormuz? It could derail negotiations.
Well, first of all,
couldn't it?
Right. To clarify, the United States is absolutely not blockading the Straits of Hormuz. There is absolute free passage in the straits. What the United States is doing is imposing a blockade on Iranian ports. Everyone who wants to come in and stop in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia are welcome and have been. The United States sent 2 destroyers in to make sure that there was freedom of navigation, because that's why the U.S. Navy is there. But it is blockading those ports, and the Iranian ports. And it's because Iran has constantly used negotiation as a delaying tactic so they can get their act together. The United States is onto this, understands this, and is not going to break off the blockade until such time as a deal is actually concluded.
Okay, thank you so much for speaking to us and sharing your expertise with us. Scott Eulinger, retired CIA station